US President Joe Biden has arrived in Poland after making a surprise visit to Ukraine. Biden flew from the Polish border into Warsaw on Air Force One, capping a long day of travel that included a trip to Kyiv by train. He announced another $500 million of military aid for Ukraine, including ammunition, radar and other equipment. While in Warsaw, Biden will meet the Polish president along with leaders of other countries on NATO's eastern flank. The US leader's diplomatic blitz comes just days ahead of the war's one-year mark and Russia's expected spring offensive.
Morning, Mr. President.
A gesture of solidarity and a vital reminder of unity between the US and Ukraine against Russian aggression. Air raid sirens blared across the Ukrainian capital during US President Joe Biden's surprise visit. There were no reports of Russian airstrikes, but the sound is still a clear reminder that Ukraine is under constant attack, making support from the US more important now than ever.
And I'm here to show our unwavering support for the nation's independence, their sovereignty, and territorial integrity. And today, I hope we're going to have a chance to discuss how the United States and our allies, by keeping constant contact with and our partners, can most effectively support you and your cause, Mr. President.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky voiced his gratitude.
That a huge moment of supporting of the Ukraine, and what can I say? I really appreciate that President Biden, American society, being from the very beginning of this tragedy, from the very beginning of this full-scale war, from the first days being together with us. First phone call of supporting was from White House to Ukraine. And thank you for your leadership. Thanks bipartisan support. Thanks Congress. I think that is a historical moment for our country.
The two presidents paid tribute at the Wall of Remembrance to the thousands of Ukrainian soldiers who have lost their lives since 2014. Biden's visit comes at a crucial moment in the war, as the U.S. needs to keep allies unified in their support for Ukraine if Ukraine is to fend off Russian offensives in the spring.
DW's Fanny Fashara is in the capital, Kyiv, for us. Fanny, the Biden visit came as a big surprise yesterday. Did you get a sense of what this visit meant to the Ukrainian people?
Everyone I spoke to was really impressed. This country is at war, so to see US President Biden really walk through the city center while there is an air raid alert is obviously something that took everyone here by surprise. The people really connect this historic visit to the hope that, yes, US President Biden and the United States as a whole is going to really stand by the side of Ukraine, as, quote, as President Biden said, as long as it takes. Now, President Biden didn't come empty-handed, as we heard in that report. He promised a $500 million package of more military aid. But here's also a little bit the concern of people, just when that weaponry is going to arrive, and is it really enough? Because as we have heard, yes, air defense systems, ammunition is on the way to this country. But at the same time, we have also heard President Zelensky saying there was discussion about long-range missiles, but are they going to ever come here to Ukraine? Also, what about the fighter jets? So this entire visit is connected to the hope that the US is going to continue to support Ukraine. But the question is just how soon that weaponry is going to arrive to really help Ukrainian soldiers at the front that we actually just visited a couple of days ago to fend off Russian aggression.
So, Fanny, a day later, and Russia's President Putin is expected to give a State of the Nation address in Moscow today. What's expected from that speech?
We just have to listen basically to the speeches that President Putin delivered in the past. For example, his New Year's address, where he was obviously painting this picture that he painted from the beginning of this war, which is trying to tell his audience back home, but also to the world, obviously, why he attacked this country in first place, which is trying to protect Russia's security, trying to make sure that people who speak the Russian language in Ukraine, in his view, are not facing atrocities, etc. So he's going to continue to feed into their propaganda that we have heard before. But because of the visit yesterday by President Biden, maybe that he has edited really this speech, and it's going to be even more combative to make sure that the people back home in Russia actually understand why this country, why Russia is still at war with Ukraine more than almost a year, since a year.
DW's Fanny Fashar, thank you so much. For more on the Biden visit, Raphael Loss of the European Council on Foreign Affairs is with me here in Berlin. Good to have you with us. Almost a year from the start of the war. Beyond the symbolism, what do you make of the timing of Biden's visit?
I think it is all about the symbolism. Biden's visit to Ukraine's capital, Kiev, after 1 year of Russia's full-scale invasion on the 24th of February of 2022, I think is reminiscent of President John F. Kennedy's visit to West Berlin in 1963. It is a monumental symbol at a time when Ukraine's armed forces in the Donbas region and Bakhmut in particular are under a lot of pressure. And it comes at a time where Western support for Ukraine needs to be stepped up to sustain Ukraine's defensive fight.
Yeah, Biden said that the US and NATO will support Ukraine for as long as it takes. But political and public support in the US is waning. How much longer do you think Ukraine can afford to rely on the United States as its main source of funding?
I think NATO countries, including Europeans and the United States, are transitioning their aid to Ukraine, going from a political ad hoc decision-making system that relied on highest level approval of new weapon systems, the latest round including long-term debates on whether or not to supply Western-produced tanks to Ukraine, transitioning that ad hoc decision-making process into something that is more sustainable, where defense industry plays a greater role, and that ensures to Ukraine's armed forces that they can plan with a certain amount of ammunition that will reach them going forward. NATO countries have also pledged to ramp up their production of critical defense goods, not only to support Ukraine, but also to rebuild their own stockpiles, and particularly considering discussions ongoing at the NATO alliance about the future of NATO's defense posture in Europe. I think defense industry, again, will play a big role here.
All of this, of course, coincides with Putin's annual State of the Nation speech in Moscow. How focused do you think Biden is on countering just the idea of waning support for the war?
I think that certainly is one of the underlying messages of his visit to Kiev, but also to Warsaw today. If you contrast Vladimir Putin with Ukraine's own leader, Volodymyr Zelensky, or Joe Biden, I think he looks like a dictator hiding in his bunker. He's rarely come out of the Kremlin. He hasn't visited troops on the front line, whereas Volodymyr Zelensky has done so repeatedly. And now Joe Biden, arguably the most powerful person in the world, visited and battled Kiev. I think that the contrast couldn't be starker, and I think that is particularly what Western leaders, Joe Biden, Volodymyr Zelensky, but also other Europeans who have made that trip, want to underline by visiting.
Raphael Loss from the European Council on Foreign Affairs, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.